Hello, and welcome to the library today. Welcome to those of you who are watching online as well. My name is Renee, and it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker this evening. Dr. Erica Almenara is Associate Professor of Spanish and Director of Comparative Literature and Cultural Studies at the University of Arkansas. She was a Fulbright Senior Scholar in Peru 2022 to 2023 and President of the Peru section of the Latin American Studies Association. Her research and teaching interests include Andean oral, written, and visual culture, literacy, critical, subaltern, and post-colonial theory, radical thought and avant-garde aesthetics in the Andes and the Southern Cone, as well as feminist and trans-feminist theory. Today she will be discussing Latino poetry from the anthology Latino Poetry, edited by Rigoberto Gonzalez. This program is presented as part of Latino Poetry, Places We Call Home, a major public humanities initiative taking place across the nation in 2024 and 2025, directed by Library of America and funded with generous support from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Welcome, Dr. Almenara.
Thank you, Renee, and thank you to the Fayetteville Public Library for this kind invitation. I'm very honored of speaking about this really interesting book today and sharing some of my ideas and reactions towards this book that has been published by Rigoberto Gonzalez. The name of the book is Latino Poetry, and Gonzalez, the person who edited the volume, is a distinguished professor of English at Rutgers University. He is the director of the Master of Arts in Creative Writing. He is the author of 17 books of poetry and prose and have received several awards such as the Guggenheim, the American Book Award, the Poetry Society of America, among others. So, Latino Poetry is a book that teaches about diversity, how it shapes the country we live in, but also the world, the planet we inhabit. Departing from the word Latino, understood as a diverse and unfixed space from where to attest the heterogeneity of different communities and traditions coexisting. This includes language as the text presented in the anthology fuse Anglophone, Hispanic, and indigenous tongues. I think this is a great gesture from the editor as it points to the diversity and multiplicity of subjectivities, groups, pasts, presents, and futures that shape Latino identity. The book reunites the best Latino, Latina, Latine poets who coincide in discussing what it means to make a home in America, considering different arenas such as ethnicity, sexuality, labor, among others. And here I have a question, which is why Gonzalez used the term Latino and not include Latina, Latine, or Latinx, as the anthology includes men, women, and queer poets. And then I reflected that this might have been a choice that is related to the fact that some Latino scholars and artists consider the term Latino, with an O, that the term Latino has a symbolic weight, which is that of a historical struggle for benefits, respect, and inclusion for the Latino community. In a way, I think that Latino poetry tells a story built from the different perspectives shared by each one of the poems included in the anthology. If you pay attention to the titles of each of the 6 sections the book is divided into, you will see what I am talking about. Part 1, Antecedentes, approaches the history of conquest and colonization of the so-called New World. Through the texts included in this section, we go deeper in the consequences that this non-yet healed trauma has had in the experience of life of Latin American and Latino peoples and cultures, especially to their indigenous and African descendant populations. As we know, the conquest transformed vigorous native peoples of America into an inferior caste of Indians subordinated to Spanish colonizers and Europe's creation of a world market. Poems included in this section approach the abuses experienced by indigenous peoples during colonization, but it also considers their resistance to these same abuses. This is really important as historical official narratives have tended to only represent indigenous peoples as victims, erasing with this their agency in organizing themselves to fight and resist the colonizers. In this sense, Antecedentes attests to the reality that, as French philosopher Jacques Rancière states, and I quote, "Writing history and writing stories come under the same regime of truth," end of quote. Thus, these poems offer new ways of narrating the agency of indigenous peoples in the context of colonization. Antecedentes also includes poems that honor our ancestors and those who fought for the independence of countries such as Mexico, Cuba, and Puerto Rico. Here, José Martí is a key figure as during the 19th century, he united the divided independentist Cuban forces. Although he did not live to see a free Cuba, his impact in the narratives related to freedom and republicanism were of great influence on the development of a Cuban and Latin American national identity through the concept of mestizaje. Also, Fidel Castro based his revolution on Martí's political ideas. Some of Martí's ideas, independentist ideas, expressed in these poems that are included in this first part, Antecedentes, were produced in the 19th century. Nevertheless, some of these ideas have been engaged with during the 20th century by Latino poets, especially those poems that address identity and belonging. Finally, this part, Antecedentes, includes texts by poets such as Lola Rodriguez and Joseito Fernández that addresses exile during the 19th century in places such as New York that since then began to represent spaces of hospitality to those who were persecuted for their ideas because of their color, of their skin, etc. These poems emphasize that from these beginnings, New York City has remained an important center for Latinos and Latinas as well as their literary production. Part 2, Corridos and Nostalgia Songs, explores the historical dialogue between the musical and folk traditions with Latino poetry. I'm especially grateful for the inclusion of corridos and nostalgia songs in the anthology, as it is a recognition of the strength and value of oral tradition and popular culture. Corridos are Mexican folk ballads that were very popular during the Mexican Revolution of 1910, the first mainly indigenous and peasant revolution in Latin America that overthrew the 30-year dictatorship of Porfirio Díaz. This section also includes later editions of some of these corridos, especially those that address migration, trauma, and racism. Part 3, Latinos Ancestors, is divided between Latin American and Latino poets that are considered the foundational voices of contemporary Latino poetry. This is the first section where we read female poets, female voices. And this is not an absence or a mistake reproduced by the book. I think the anthology is pointing and in a way questioning the lack of female voices in early canonical Latino and Latin American poetry. In this section, we read the female poetic voice from the great Puerto Rican poet Julia de Burgos, as well as others. De Burgos is considered a literary icon and foremother of the New Yorican movement in New York. She served as Secretary General of the Daughters of Freedom, the women's branch of the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party. So the book, although has a very compelling introduction, does not include like small introductions to each part of the book, but I think that the elections, the choices, and the way the poems are administered in the whole book are also telling a story. I mean, with this I mean that there is a story or many stories told by the poems themselves, but also in the way the book is organized. So, for instance, it's only until part 3 where we find a female poet, a female voice included, and this opens our reflection to the reality that female writers, female artists has historically been also marginalized. So in this way, the book also questions not only how or why being Latino has been a source of being excluded or violentado or violentada, but also points to the reality that there are identity markers such as gender that also collaborate in this way of marginalization. Part 4, titled, "Let Me Tell You What a Poem Brings," explores the strong relationship between politics and literature. It especially delves into the term Chicano, Chicana, once a slur and a word used to denigrate Latinos, Latinas in the United States. It was reclaimed, the term, in the 40s by young Latinas and Latinos as an expression of pride in Mexican and indigenous roots. Let Me Tell You What a Poem Brings includes a poem by Gloria Anzaldúa, who was a scholar of Chicano cultural theory, feminist theory, and queer theory. Anzaldúa marked an important intervention in feminist studies by bringing in different subjectivities and experiences, and is considered pivotal in the development of third world feminism. She grew up on the US-Mexican border and a lesbian. These theaters of her identity mark her experiences of life and her writing. For instance, in the poem included at the anthology, "To Live in the Borderlands Means You," Anzaldúa explores mixed race identity, inviting the reader to embrace their heterogeneity, their difference, to empower her, him, or themselves. So I thought that it was gonna be a good idea to read this beautiful poem, so I'm gonna share with you a copy of the poem. It's not very long, so I'll read it. Again, the title is "To Live in the Borderlands" by Gloria Anzaldúa. To live in the borderlands means you are neither hispana, india, negra, española, ni gabacha, eres mestiza, mulata, half-breed, caught in the crossfire between camps, while carrying all 5 races on your back, not knowing which side to turn to, run from. To live in the borderlands means knowing that the India in you, betrayed for 500 years, is no longer speaking to you. The Mexicanas call you rajetas, that denying the Anglo inside you is as bad as having denied the Indian or black. Cuando vives en la frontera, people walk through you. The wind steals your voice. You are a burra, buey, scapegoat, forerunner of a new race. Half and half both, woman and man, neither a new gender. To live in the borderlands means to put chile in the board, eat whole wheat tortillas, speak Tex-Mex with a Brooklyn accent, be stopped by La Migra at the border checkpoints. Living in the borderlands means you fight hard to resist the gold elixir beckoning from the bottle, the pull of the gun barrel, the rope crushing the hollow of your throat. In the borderlands, you are the battleground, where enemies are kin to each other. You are at home, a stranger. The border disputes have been settled. The volley of shots have scattered the truth. You are wounded, lost in action, dead, fighting back. To live in the borderlands means the meal with the razor-white teeth wants to shred off your olive red skin, crush out the kernel, your heart pound, you pinch, you roll you out, smelling like white bread but dead. To survive the borderlands, you must live sin fronteras, be a crossroads. So, as you see, in this poem, several important topics that are related to Latino, Latina, Latine, Latinx identity are expressed. But I think that the main topic is that of race, of not belonging to a pure race, to a pure ethnicity. And from this idea, or from this reality, Ansaldúa traverses different venues of her own identity as her being queer, but also as living that is always, someone that is always living in danger, somebody who is always under the threat of experiencing violence just to be who she is, just to be how she is. The interesting thing, though, is that in this poem, Ansaldúa is not talking or speaking about only those outside of her community that reject her. She's also pointing to the fact that even inside her own community of people living in the borderlands reject her. And she has many other poems where she expresses how for her growing as a lesbian in a family that was Catholic was also an issue. And I think that in the whole work of Ansaldúa, we can really understand the different colors of how it can be painful to live a person that is in between so many things, in between genders, in between races, in between ethnicities, in between nationalities. But this is not only this. We can also find in her poetry, in her essays, an empowerment, a way of understanding all these reasons why she has been marginalized and received violence, a space or an invitation or a motivation, I would dare to say, to empower yourself, to be proud of yourself, to find this darkness a way to create light because of surviving all these different violences that she and other women and men and children experience because of who they are. Now I'm gonna move to part 5, Howling as They Came, which includes several poems related to the experience of different Latinos and Latines in the academic world. So we also see a progression, right, of how in the history of the US, the Latino communities have occupied different spaces, have experienced different ways of interacting in the culture, in the country, of reacting, of surviving, of creating, of recreating, of being resilient and creative with this that is happening or that have been happening to them. And then we get into part 5, where we encounter the fact that Latinos and Latinas enter the academic world, and this new presence took place in the 60s and was related to the Latinos and Latinas who received instruction in different Master of Arts in Creative Writing, in different programs in creative writing, and many of them became academic themselves, so they taught generations of students, so that's how a new circle or a new reality or a new space for Latinos also happened, that was the academic world. Finally, part 6, My Body Sang Its and Death, includes texts that address topics related to contemporary problematics such as drug trafficking, women trafficking, rape and violence, especially against women and LGBTQ+ Latinas, Latinos, Latines, as explored in Miguel Algarin's poem named HIV. Algarin's poem explores queer sexuality and HIV infection in the LGBTQ+ community. Laura Villarreal's poem, Home is Where the Closet Is, addresses lesbianism and ethnicity. So as in the case with Ansaldúa, Villarreal's poem also addresses the reality of being Latina, and in this case also of being a lesbian. To end this presentation, I want to mention that the past decade has witnessed a continent-wide rise in indigenous language publications. The new wave of indigenous literatures has arisen in the wake of dramatic acts of violence, such as military repression and neoliberal economic restructuring. These violences are also practiced against the Latino community. According to an annual report by the FBI, the rate of hate crimes against Latinos in the US is at its highest in nearly a decade. So let's not forget the lynchings of Mexican Americans and Mexican nationals performed in the 30s, the violence at the hands of police, soldiers, and even ex-presidents against the Latino community. Let's make of these poems a reminder of our strength, resilience, but most importantly, of our beauty and unity. Thank you. I don't know if you have any question or comment that you'd like to share with me.
There seems to be a lot of pain expressed in this book and in the poems, and frustration, unable to really do anything about that, you know, to find a niche, to find a place that is devoid of so much prejudice.
Yeah, for sure there is pain, frustration, but there is also love. There is also love, there is also pride, there is also empowerment, there is also unity. So, I mean, the book has more than 300 pages where you can find different kind of poems that would point you to different experiences, to different feelings, and also to a kind of progression in time of how or what has been the situation for the Latino community. Yes.
I was struck, I watched Cry the Beloved Country about South Africa by Alan Payton last night, and the line that really really struck me was, I hope that when, and it was spoken by a black man about white men, I hope that when they turn to loving and caring for us, that we have not turned to hate. And it seems like Latin people are caught in that same situation.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, I have been a teacher at the university since 2015. And when I taught my classes, I mean, my students were mainly Americans. And since then, I have seen how the Latino and the Latin American community at the University of Arkansas has been growing. And I have also seen how the university has created different organizations, provide from different resources for these students. We have an amazing Latin American and Latino studies program. We have an office and a space where students gather, have presentations, but just get together to have lunch or to talk about a topic. So those kind of things are important, to give those students a space for them to experience that they belong, not only their communities, but the whole community,
Yes.
right? And well, we also have, of course, a Spanish section under the Department of World Languages, Literatures and Cultures, where I teach. And yeah, it's amazing how the number of heritage speaker students that grew in a home where Spanish was spoken, or came to live in America when they were, I don't know, 10, 8, so they have a background in Spanish. They are doing great things. So definitely there is a growing presence, and in places like Arkansas, Fayetteville, I think that there is an important contribution and interaction with the Latino
Where
community.
do you see most of the students coming from, the Latin students coming from?
Well,
This area or other states?
yeah, so Springdale, Fayetteville, but also now I have a student from Dallas, from Houston, that are coming to study here, and they are choosing us. And I think that the administration has realized that we also have to offer more resources, more spaces to these students that are choosing us, to welcome them. And I do believe that the university is doing such. We have different organizations created by students, like Casa, home, house, Casa. We also have different groups from students, for instance, Latinos at the military, you see, so we have like different specific groups, and we try to make them to connect and be together. And I think that us, the teachers that also come from Latin America, I mean, I didn't grow up here. I came to study when I was in my 20s, and I studied a PhD, and then I got this job and I stay. So my experience is different. I don't consider myself a Latina. I am Latin American because I didn't grow up here. I mean, I don't have that experience that I could compare with other people that deserve that term. But I think that we are also an example to our students, and a point of contact. So our offices are always open to them. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for your questions and your comments and for being interested. It's a great book. I hope you can read some of the poems.
Does the library have it?
Yes. Yeah. Actually, I have the copy from the library that I have to give back. So you can check it out for sure. And if you have any question or you want to discuss this further, I'll give you my card so you can contact me.
Please do, yes.
Of course. Well, I think that we're done. Yeah. Thanks.